Picture yourself standing in the very heart of the ancient theatre of Epidaurus, surrounded by row upon row of weathered limestone seats climbing high into the Greek sky. Below you, the circular orchestra floor seems almost small from where you stand, yet when someone on that stage whispers a single word, a secret, a confession, something meant only for a chosen few, you hear it with absolute clarity, as if they were speaking directly into your ear. This isn't just an architectural marvel, it's an acoustic miracle that defies everything we assume about how sound behaves over distance. For centuries, we've been told these grand structures were built for performance, for drama, for the retelling of epic myths. But what if that was only half the story? What if these theaters were, in fact, among the world's first and most sophisticated systems for eavesdropping, designed not just to entertain the masses, but to capture the whispers that shaped empires? There's something almost magical about standing in a space where sound travels with such impossible precision. It feels like stepping into a world where walls have ears, and every murmured word has weight. We've long marveled at the grandeur of these ancient ruins, the sweeping curves, the mathematical perfection, the sense of scale that makes a single human feel small. But behind that beauty lies intention. These were not passive venues, they were engineered with a purpose that went far beyond entertainment. In a time long before wiretaps or hidden microphones, the architects of antiquity designed spaces where secrets could not stay hidden, where a conversation between conspirators, a confession between lovers, or a plot whispered among rivals could be lifted from the air and used to change the course of history. Today, we're going to unravel one of history's most captivating mysteries. We'll travel back through time, not just to Greece, but to Rome and beyond, exploring how these theaters functioned as instruments of power, spirituality, and surveillance. We'll meet the architects who turned stone and geometry into acoustic traps, the spies who used performances as cover, and the everyday people whose whispers might have shaped the fate of nations. This is a story about how ancient civilizations understood sound in ways we're only beginning to fully appreciate, and how they used that knowledge to listen in on the world around them. So settle in, open your ears, and let's begin a journey that will forever change how you see and hear these magnificent relics of the past. To truly grasp the genius behind these acoustic marvels, we must journey back to their very beginnings, to the sun-drenched hillsides of ancient Greece, where theater was not merely an art form, but a vital, pulsating organ of society itself. The story starts not with architects and engineers, but with communities gathering in natural hollows and on sloping terrain to participate in rituals that were deeply sacred. These were the precursors to the grand stone structures we marvel at today, simple, open-air spaces where the line between performer and participant, between the divine and the mortal, was beautifully blurred. At the heart of this cultural explosion was the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and ecstatic release. During the great festivals held in his honor, entire city-states would come together. In Athens, the city Dionysia was not just a play competition. It was a profound civic and religious event, a time when the social order was both reinforced and questioned through the stories told on stage. The earliest theaters were not built so much as they were carved, taking advantage of the natural topography. Imagine the Athenian Acropolis looming above, and just on its southern slope, a space being shaped into the theater of Dionysus. The builders didn't fight the landscape, they collaborated with it, sculpting the hillside into a semicircular bowl of stepped seating that cradled the audience. This wasn't an arbitrary design choice. That curved shape, facing a flat orchestra circle and a simple stage building or skene, began as a practical solution for visibility. But very quickly, the ancient Greeks discovered something extraordinary about this configuration. The geometry acted as a natural amplifier. Sound waves from the orchestra would travel upward, reflecting off the stone seats and the backs of the spectators, creating a phenomenon where even the most delicate vocal nuances, a sigh, a whispered aside, the rustle of a costume, could be carried with stunning clarity to the very top rows. This incredible acoustic clarity is our first major clue that these spaces were designed for more than just projecting the loud, declamatory style of tragic actors. If the sole purpose was to reach a large crowd with a powerful voice, the design could have been far simpler, but the precision with which these theaters captured sound suggests a far more nuanced intention. It points to a desire to hear everything, not just the projected lines of the main character, but the quiet reactions of the chorus, the murmured responses from other actors, and perhaps even the hushed conversations happening among the audience members themselves. This inherent capability to transmit the faintest sounds so effectively transforms the theater from a passive venue into an active instrument, a sophisticated device for auditory collection. In a society where information was currency and political intrigue was a constant undercurrent, the ability to overhear, to truly listen in, was a form of power. The very architecture, therefore, sets the stage for a dual existence, a public forum for cultural storytelling and a covert landscape for the gathering of intelligence, all born from a religious ceremony on a Greek hillside. This mastery of sound didn't happen by chance. It was the product of meticulous, deliberate engineering that rivals even our modern understanding of acoustics. The architects of these spaces weren't just builders, they were early physicists manipulating the very behavior of sound waves with an intuitive grasp of mathematics and geometry. The signature semicircular shape known as the cavea wasn't merely for aesthetics or even just for a good view. This curve was a calculated funnel for sound. When a voice projected from the central orchestra, the sound waves would radiate outward, hit the curved rows of stone seats, and be reflected back inward, focused and amplified. Each tier of stepped seating acted like a baffle, breaking up and redirecting sound energy upward, preventing it from simply dissipating into the open air. This careful shaping effectively created a natural sound lens, concentrating even the most delicate noises toward the audience. The materials chosen were just as crucial as the shape. Builders predominantly used limestone and marble, not only for their durability but for their specific acoustic properties. These dense stones are highly reflective to sound. They don't absorb vibrations well, which means sound waves bounce off their hard surfaces with minimal energy loss. The stepped rows of seats with their precise, hard angles acted as a series of acoustic filters. Researchers have found that these steps naturally suppress the low-frequency rumble of a crowd, the distracting background noise, while simultaneously enhancing the mid-range frequencies that are most critical for understanding speech and, most tellingly, the faint, higher frequencies that characterize a whisper. This filtering effect creates a startlingly clear auditory channel, isolating the human voice from the ambient noise of 1,000 people. Modern scientific experiments have put these ancient designs to the test with astonishing results. Using digital audio equipment and sound frequency generators, acoustic engineers have demonstrated that the frequency response in a theater like Epidaurus is nearly perfect for human communication. While a booming theatrical voice might project at around 100 Hz, a hushed secret falls into a much higher range, around 500 Hz. Incredibly, these structures are precisely tuned to capture and carry those specific frequencies with minimal distortion over vast distances. A person whispering on stage can be heard with perfect intelligibility 60 meters away, a feat that seems to defy physics until you understand the genius of the design. This capability to transmit a whisper so clearly is the smoking gun. There is simply no practical reason for this feature in a standard dramatic performance, where the goal is to project emotion and story to the back row. You don't need to hear an actor's whisper to understand the plot of a Greek tragedy, but you absolutely need to hear it if you're a priest listening for a confidential confession or a spy gathering intelligence on a political rival. This leads us to the inescapable conclusion that this acoustic perfection was intentional, a feature and not a happy accident. In an era without newspapers, telephones, or digital networks, information was the ultimate currency. The ability to control the flow of secrets, to overhear a plot before it unfolded, to learn a rival's weakness, to confirm a loyalty or uncover a betrayal, was a direct form of power. The theater, a public space where people naturally let their guard down, became the perfect instrument for this. Its brilliant acoustic design transformed it from a passive container for art into an active listening device, a monumental ear carved into the hillside, forever straining to catch the whispers that shaped the ancient world. But these marvels of acoustic engineering were not built in a vacuum. They were born into a world seething with political ambition, shifting alliances, and constant danger. To truly understand why someone would go to such incredible lengths to design a building that could capture a whisper, we must step away from the architect's plans and into the shadowy corridors of power in ancient Greece and Rome. The theater, for all its cultural grandeur, was never just a place of escape. It was a central nervous system for the city-state, a place where the most powerful and influential citizens gathered not only to be seen but to see, and more importantly, to listen. Imagine the scene on a festival day in Rome. The immense multi-story facade of a theater like Pompey's is adorned with banners and garlands. The air hums with the chatter of thousands of citizens, a mix of rich and poor, senators and slaves, all taking their assigned seats. The social hierarchy is mapped onto the very stone, the elite in the coveted front rows, the common citizens in the middle, and the very poorest and women often relegated to the highest, farthest tiers. This wasn't just about the best view of the play, it was about creating a panopticon of sound. From their privileged positions down front, a senator could be observed by everyone, but thanks to the acoustics, he could also be heard by anyone listening carefully. A political rival a few rows back, a spy for the emperor hidden in the crowd, or even an informant perched high above. All could potentially eavesdrop on a private conversation meant to be concealed by the noise of the crowd. This made the theater the perfect cover for intelligence gathering. Historical figures understood this intimately. The biographer Plutarch recounts how the Athenian general and statesman Themistocles was known to frequent the theater specifically to listen for useful gossip and political murmurs that could aid his strategies. In Rome, the stakes were even higher. The playwright Seneca noted that Emperor Augustus, a master of public perception, would often attend plays not for enjoyment, but to gauge the mood of the people. He would listen for the crowd's reactions to certain lines, which were sometimes subtly edited to test public opinion on a controversial policy or to smear a political opponent. But it went far beyond reading the room. The theater's design allowed for the discreet placement of delators, professional informers who made a living by overhearing seditious talk or plots against the state and reporting them to the authorities. A whispered complaint about taxes or a cynical joke about the emperor's new wife, uttered in what one thought was a moment of privacy, could travel along the curved stone and straight to the ears of an informant with devastating consequences. The very architecture of these spaces facilitated this culture of surveillance. Beyond the main seating, theaters were labyrinths of vaulted corridors, shaded passageways, and shadowy alcoves designed for circulation. These areas away from the main spectacle became the stages for the real drama. It was here that secret deals were brokered, alliances were forged, and betrayals were set in motion. The hard, reflective surfaces of these enclosed spaces would have carried whispers even more effectively than the open cavea, creating perfect pockets for clandestine meetings and equally perfect opportunities for eavesdropping. A conspirator might believe he was hidden in a dim corner, only to have his treacherous plans reflected and amplified by the unforgiving stone, overheard by a servant loyal to the throne. In this environment, every murmur had weight, and every secret was a currency that could either build an empire or destroy a life. The theater, therefore, was the ultimate paradox, a monument to public storytelling that simultaneously served as the ancient world's most sophisticated instrument of political control, proving that the walls didn't just have ears, they were designed to be one giant, unblinking ear forever listening. Yet beyond the cut and thrust of politics and espionage, these theaters held another, even more profound layer of purpose, one that reached into the very soul of ancient society. To understand this, we must shift our perspective from the secular to the sacred, from the Senate to the sanctuary. Long before they were stages for human drama, these spaces were fundamentally religious institutions, consecrated ground where communities communed with their gods. The theater of Dionysus in Athens wasn't just named for the god, it was physically attached to his temple, a direct architectural statement that this was first and foremost a place of worship. The performances we now call plays began as deeply religious rites, reenactments of myths designed to honor the divine, ensure a good harvest, or purify the city-state. And within these rituals, sound wasn't just a medium, it was a sacred vehicle. The most powerful moments in these ceremonies often hinged on the softest sounds. Imagine a hushed initiation rite for the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most secretive and important religious cults in the ancient world. In the dim light, within the confines of a theater's skene building or a nearby sacred precinct, a priest would whisper the innermost secrets of the cult to a new initiate. These were not secrets to be shouted, they were knowledge to be breathed, passed directly from mouth to ear in a moment of intense intimacy and power. The flawless acoustics of the surrounding structure guaranteed that this whispered wisdom, this aporit, the things not to be spoken aloud, would travel with perfect clarity to the intended recipient, while remaining an indistinct murmur to anyone else present. This wasn't a matter of convenience, it was a theological necessity. The secret itself was holy, and its controlled transmission was a key part of the ritual. The architecture served as a divine guardian of that secret, ensuring the sacred words were neither lost nor profaned. This control over sound directly reinforced the social and spiritual hierarchies of the ancient world. Access to the gods and their secrets was not democratic. It was a privilege reserved for a select few, the priests, the elite initiates, the chosen ones. The acoustic design of the theater physically encoded this inequality into stone. Those in the inner circle, the privileged participants down in the orchestra or the front rows, would experience the ritual in its full, whispered detail. They would hear the subtle inflection in the priest's voice, the precise wording of a prayer, the secret name of a deity. Meanwhile, the general public, the vast majority of spectators seated in the higher tiers, would receive a different experience entirely. They would witness the grand spectacle, the colorful processions, the chanted hymns, the symbolic actions, but the core truths, the whispered essence of the mystery, would remain just beyond their auditory grasp. They would hear the sound but not the meaning, the echo but not the secret. This created a powerful spiritual dynamic where the very structure of the building mediated one's connection to the divine, powerfully reinforcing the authority of the religious elite. This concept extended to oracles and prophecies as well. While the most famous oracle at Delphi operated from a temple, the theatrical space was often used for the interpretation and dramatic presentation of these divine pronouncements. A prophecy, once received, might be delivered in a measured, oracular tone from the stage. The acoustics ensured that every cryptic word, every ambiguous phrase, was heard by all, yet its true interpretation, often whispered afterward among the priests and ruling officials, remained the guarded knowledge of the powerful. In this way, the theater became a machine for managing religious truth, a device that could simultaneously reveal and conceal, include and exclude, using the physics of sound to shape not just what people heard, but what they believed and ultimately how they were governed. It was here, in the interplay between the shouted hymn and the whispered secret, that the theater's most enduring power was truly revealed. Now, to truly appreciate the scale of this ancient achievement, we must focus our attention on its crowning glory, the theater of Epidaurus. Nestled in the Peloponnese region of Greece, this structure stands as a breathtaking testament to classical genius, so perfectly preserved that it remains in use for performances to this very day. Constructed in the 4th century before the Common Era by the architect Polykleitos the Younger, its design represents the absolute pinnacle of the form. With 55 rows of seating divided into 2 tiers, it could accommodate up to 14,000 people, yet its most famous feature is its intimate, almost impossible acoustics. The stories are not exaggerated. From the circular orchestra floor to the very last stone bench nearly 200 feet away, the drop of a coin, the rustle of paper, or the softest whisper is transmitted with crystal clarity. This isn't a gentle amplification. It's a phenomenon that feels like magic, leaving modern visitors and acoustic scientists alike in a state of awe. The secret to this magic, however, lies not in myth, but in meticulous mathematics and a deep understanding of material science. The semicircular shape of the cavea is a masterpiece of geometry, calculated to reflect sound waves efficiently. Each of the limestone seats was precisely carved with a slight, vertical tilt at the back and a hard, flat surface. This design is crucial. Researchers like Nico de Klerk from Georgia Tech have discovered that these rows act as natural acoustic filters. The corrugated surface of the stepped seating effectively scatters and suppresses the low-frequency rumble of the crowd, the distracting background noise of thousands of people shifting and breathing, while simultaneously enhancing the higher frequencies of the human voice. The limestone itself, with its specific density and porosity, plays its part, reflecting sound at just the right angles to create a coherent wave that channels upward. It's a perfect storm of physics and design, an architectural algorithm written in stone to solve the complex problem of sound transmission over distance without a single ounce of modern technology. But to view Epidaurus solely as a venue for Sophocles or Euripides is to miss half of its story, and perhaps the more fascinating half at that. The theater was not an isolated monument. It was an integral part of the sanctuary of Asclepius, the most famous healing center in the entire ancient world. Pilgrims would travel for days, often in great pain and desperation, to seek a cure from the god of medicine. The process of healing was a holistic ritual that could last for days. Patients would undergo purification, make sacrifices, and then enter a state of enforced rest known as enkoimesis incubation, sleeping in a special abaton hall in the hope that the god Asclepius would visit them in a dream and reveal a remedy. This is where the theater's astonishing acoustics reveal their profound dual purpose. the priests of Asclepius were not merely religious figures, they were the ancient world's physicians, diagnosticians, and therapists. A critical part of their method involved listening. Patients would confess their symptoms, their fears, and the details of their dreams to the priests. In a culture where illness was often believed to be punishment from the gods or the result of moral failing, these confessions were deeply personal and shrouded in shame. The theater's design allowed these intimate consultations to happen with incredible efficiency. A priest could stand on the stage or in the orchestra, and a patient could speak to him from the seats, their whispered symptoms carried clearly by the architecture without the need for physical proximity or a raised voice that might cause embarrassment. This provided a degree of privacy and dignity within a public space, enabling the priest to hear the subtle nuances in a patient's voice, the tremor of anxiety, the weakness of spirit, which were considered just as important for diagnosis as the physical symptoms themselves. In this light, the theater of Epidaurus transforms before our eyes. It becomes more than a stage. It was a monumental healing instrument, an essential tool in the sanatorium's toolkit. The same acoustic properties that delivered gripping drama to the masses also delicately carried the vulnerable whispers of the sick to their healers. This brilliant duality shows us that ancient architecture was never about a single function. It was about integration, about designing spaces that served the complex, interwoven needs of public spectacle and private life, of civic celebration and individual care. Epidaurus stands as the ultimate example of this philosophy, a place where the science of sound was harnessed to heal the body, elevate the mind, and connect a community, all through the simple, profound power of a whisper. While the Greeks perfected the form, it was the Romans who scaled it to an imperial level, transforming the theater from a cultural and religious venue into a multifaceted instrument of state power and social engineering. They took the Greek blueprint and infused it with their own genius for engineering and their insatiable appetite for grandeur, creating structures that were not only larger and more ornate, but also more acoustically sophisticated and politically potent. The Romans were master assimilators, and their approach to theater architecture was no different. They saw a good idea and made it bigger, better, and unequivocally Roman. The most striking departure from the Greek model was the shift from building into natural hillsides to constructing freestanding marvels of engineering. Using their revolutionary building material concrete and their mastery of the arch and vault, Roman engineers could erect massive, multi-storied theater complexes on flat ground anywhere in their vast empire. The theater of Pompey, dedicated in 55 before the Common Era, was a staggering example of this ambition. It wasn't just a theater, it was a massive entertainment complex that included a vast portico with gardens, statues, and even a meeting hall for the Senate. Its sheer scale was intended to awe, seating perhaps up to 20,000 spectators. But this grandeur was not merely for show. The Romans understood that larger, enclosed spaces created new acoustic challenges, and they met them with ingenious solutions. They lined the interior with expensive, polished marble, a material even more sonically reflective than limestone. They designed intricate vaulted corridors and passageways beneath the seating, which not only managed the flow of people but also acted as resonant chambers, subtly amplifying and channeling sound throughout the structure. The curved facade at the back of the stage, the schiene fronds, became a towering, elaborate wall of columns and niches, meticulously designed to project sound outward into the audience rather than letting it escape. This architectural evolution meant that the Roman theater became a chameleon, a space designed for a dizzying array of purposes far beyond drama. On any given day, the same stage that hosted a bawdy comedy by Plautus might later be used for a political speech, a poetry reading, or even a meeting of the Senate itself. It was this very multifunctionality that made it such a perfect tool for surveillance. In the politically volatile world of Rome, where power could shift on the edge of a dagger or the point of a well-timed rumor, the theater was the ultimate listening post. The elite, draped in their white togas, occupied the prized front rows, the orchestra now reserved for senators and VIPs. Behind them sat the citizen classes, and higher still, the commoners and slaves. This vertical social stratification, etched into the stone seating, created a perfect acoustic map for eavesdropping. A whispered conspiracy between two senators, a discreet negotiation over a business deal, or a grumble of dissent from a disgruntled soldier. All these fragile sounds would ripple through the carefully engineered space. Emperors like Augustus were masters at exploiting this environment. He understood that controlling the narrative was just as important as controlling the legions. The theater was his barometer for public opinion. He and his advisors would attentively listen not just to the plays themselves, which were often laced with political subtext, but to the reactions of the crowd. A roared laugh at a joke at a rival's expense, a muted silence at a mention of a new tax, or a cheer for a popular general could all be measured and analyzed. But it went deeper than just reading the room's mood. Augustus maintained a network of informants, the delators, who would blend into the audience. Their job was to listen for the things not said on stage, the hushed conversations, the muttered criticisms, the secret plots whispered under the cover of theatrical applause. The brilliant acoustics ensured that these informers didn't need to be dangerously close to their targets. They could be rows away, their ears perfectly aided by the marble and geometry of the building itself. In this way, the grandeur of the Roman theater became a perfect disguise for its function as an intelligence-gathering apparatus, a beautiful, popular venue that was also a cornerstone of imperial control, proving that the most effective surveillance happens not in shadowy back rooms, but in the most brilliant light. This architectural ingenuity, however, was not confined to the grand theaters of Greece and Rome. The ancient obsession with capturing and controlling sound manifested in a fascinating array of structures across the globe, each designed to bend the very nature of acoustics to human will. One of the most enchanting examples is the concept of the whispering gallery. Unlike the open-air theaters designed to project sound to a mass audience, these were often enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces where sound behaved in seemingly magical ways, traveling along a curved surface to bridge impossible distances. A perfect illustration of this can be found in the immense temple of Zeus at Olympia. While largely in ruins today, its layout and the accounts from antiquity suggest that the curved walls of its inner chambers possessed this extraordinary property. Two people standing at opposite ends of such a chamber, speaking in the softest of whispers, could conduct a completely private conversation, their words skimming along the stonework as if carried by an invisible wire, utterly inaudible to anyone standing in the center of the room. This wasn't for entertainment, it was a tool for absolute privacy in a public space, allowing priests or officials to exchange confidential information right under the noses of others. The pursuit of auditory control extended even further with the development of sound mirrors. These were massive, parabolic structures, often carved directly into cliff faces or built from stone, that functioned like gigantic satellite dishes long before the invention of electronics. Their purpose was long-distance communication and early warning. A person speaking quietly into the focal point of one of these concave walls would have their voice focused and projected in a tight beam over remarkable distances, sometimes for miles across valleys or open water. Another person standing at the focal point of a second, similar mirror could catch this message with stunning clarity. This technology was a cornerstone of military strategy and border security for ancient empires. In Persia, for instance, along the vast frontiers of the empire, a chain of such sound mirrors could be used to relay messages about invading armies or shifting borders far faster than a messenger could run, creating a primitive but highly effective communication network that leveraged the landscape itself. This global fascination reveals a universal truth about ancient civilizations. From China to the Americas, there was a shared, profound understanding of environmental acoustics and a drive to harness them. The elaborate echo chambers built into the pyramids of Mesoamerica were not accidental. They were designed to amplify the chants of priests and the sounds of rituals, creating an overwhelming sensory experience that reinforced divine authority. In China, the Temple of Heaven in Beijing features a famous triple echo wall. A whisper spoken at one point on this circular wall can be heard clearly at any other point, a feature that undoubtedly served both ceremonial purposes and the discrete needs of the imperial court. What connects these diverse innovations, the whispering gallery, the sound mirror, and the ancient theater, is a core set of acoustic principles: the reflection of sound waves, the focusing properties of curved surfaces, and the filtering of specific frequencies. By placing the Greek and Roman theaters within this wider technological tradition, we see them not as isolated miracles of engineering, but as part of a continuous human endeavor to master the invisible world of sound. This broader context profoundly enriches our understanding. It demonstrates that the secretive function of theaters, their ability to eavesdrop and gather intelligence, was not a bizarre anomaly but a logical application of a well-understood ancient science. The same physics that allowed a Persian lookout to hear the hoofbeats of an approaching army miles away also allowed a Roman informant to hear a senator's treacherous whisper 50 rows away. This was a world without microphones, but it was not a world without amplification. It was a world where architecture was the amplifier, and the most powerful people were those who knew how to listen. But the true masters of this delicate dance between art and intelligence were the playwrights themselves, who wielded their pens as precisely as any spy might wield a dagger. In the volatile political climate of ancient Athens, where public criticism of powerful figures could lead to exile or worse, the stage offered a unique shield of deniability. A comedian like Aristophanes became a legend not just for his wit, but for his audacity. His plays are littered with thinly veiled caricatures of the most influential men of his day. In the Knights, he savagely lampoons the demagogue Cleon, portraying him as a corrupt and boorish sausage seller. This was dangerous territory, but by embedding these attacks within the framework of a fantastical comedy, performed during a religious festival, Aristophanes created a layer of protection. He could claim it was all in good fun, mere entertainment for the god Dionysus. Yet the pointed barbs landed with unerring accuracy, their meaning crystal clear to the audience. The real genius, however, lay in the delivery. An actor could choose to whisper a particularly incendiary line, a technique known as perpigraph or aside. To the majority of the audience, it might register as a muttered joke, but to the intended target or to their enemies seated in an acoustically privileged spot, that whispered insult would carry with haunting clarity a personal and unmistakable message delivered under the cover of public performance. This was satire as a surgical strike, and it demonstrates how the theater's unique properties were actively used to shape political discourse and settle scores without ever drawing a sword. This carefully engineered social stratification, carved directly into the stone benches, transformed the theater into a living, breathing map of the city's power structure, a perfect instrument for those who knew how to read it. For the ruling class, this wasn't just a matter of privilege and the best view of the performance. It was a strategic command center. From their front row seats in the orchestra, the patricians, senators, and wealthy elites were on full display, their reactions and interactions a public performance in themselves. Yet this visibility was a double-edged sword. While they could be seen by all, the remarkable acoustics meant they could also be heard by many. A hushed negotiation for a marriage alliance, a discreet complaint about a political rival, or a whispered piece of financial gossip, these fragile sounds, meant only for the ear of a trusted colleague, could travel along the curved rows and be captured by a rival faction's informant seated strategically a few tiers above. The elite were both the watchers and the watched, operating in a delicate auditory arena where every whispered word carried potential risk. Meanwhile, high above in the bleacher-style seats known as the summer cavia, the common citizens, the freedmen, and often the women created a constant, low hum of their own, a living barometer of public sentiment. To the authorities below, this section was not just a cheap seat, it was an intelligence goldmine. The acoustic design that so perfectly captured whispers on the stage also excelled at isolating and carrying the collective murmur of the crowd. A sudden, unified gasp at a line in a play could reveal a widely held fear. A rumble of discontent during a political announcement could signal brewing unrest. Even more telling were the pockets of intense, quiet conversation. A small group of sailors from the Piraeus harbor leaning in close, their voices a conspiratorial buzz, might be discussing a planned strike over grain prices. The muttered grievances of farmers from the outskirts about a new tax could easily drift down to the attentive ears of a government official. The theater's soundscape provided a real-time, unfiltered feed of the city's mood, a resource far more valuable than any formal report. This environment created a powerful psychological effect, a form of social control that philosopher Jeremy Bentham would much later theorize as the panopticon. The core idea of a panopticon is that a central authority can observe everyone, but the subjects can never know for certain if they are being watched, or in this case, listened to, at any given moment. This uncertainty alone is enough to modify behavior. In the ancient theater, no one could ever be sure if their private joke about the emperor or their whispered complaint about a magistrate was being overheard by a spy, an informer, or even just a nosy neighbor who might report it for a reward. This pervasive, low-level anxiety enforced a powerful self-censorship. People learned to guard their tongues, to measure their words even in what felt like a moment of privacy within a crowd of thousands. The architecture itself became an agent of conformity, a silent enforcer of the social order that convinced citizens to police their own speech and, by extension, their own thoughts. The fear of the ear was as potent as the fear of the sword. For centuries, the miraculous acoustics of ancient theaters were shrouded in legend, often dismissed as a happy accident of design or a myth exaggerated by time. How could a structure built over 2,000 years ago, without a single decibel meter or computer simulation, achieve what our modern concert halls still struggle with? It's a question that has puzzled historians and architects for generations. But in the last few decades, a revolutionary new field of study has emerged to finally subject these ancient wonders to rigorous scientific scrutiny, moving beyond speculation and into the realm of hard data. This discipline is archaeoacoustics, a fascinating marriage of archaeology and sound science, and its findings have not only confirmed the incredible auditory properties of these spaces, but have definitively proven they were engineered with a precise and secretive purpose in mind. Researchers like Dr. Nico de Klerk and his team at the Georgia Institute of Technology have been at the forefront of this acoustic detective work. They took their sophisticated equipment to some of the best-preserved ancient theaters, including the crown jewel of Epidaurus. Instead of relying on anecdotal reports of whispering actors, They used ultrasonic waves and advanced digital sound mapping to deconstruct the exact behavior of sound within the stone bowl. What they discovered was a masterpiece of passive audio engineering. The key lies not in a single feature, but in a perfect synergy of geometry and material. The stepped rows of seats, once thought to be merely for structural support or better sightlines, actually function as a natural filter for sound waves. The corrugated surface they create effectively scatters and dampens the low-frequency rumble of a restless crowd, the background noise that would otherwise mask subtle sounds. Simultaneously, these steps amplify the mid to high frequencies that are essential for understanding human speech, and most critically, the specific frequency range of a whispered voice. This filtering effect is compounded by the principle of diffraction, where sound waves bend around obstacles. Each individual spectator becomes an acoustic diffuser, helping to scatter the sound evenly throughout the space. Furthermore, the precise curvature of the cavea creates zones of constructive and destructive interference, guiding and focusing sound waves toward the upper tiers with minimal loss of clarity. The limestone itself, chosen by the builders for its availability and workability, turned out to have the perfect density and porosity to reflect sound at the optimal rate, hard enough to bounce it efficiently, but with enough texture to prevent the harsh, echoing ring that would occur with smoother marble. This isn't a lucky coincidence. It's evidence of a deep, empirical understanding of sound behavior, knowledge that was likely gained through generations of observation, trial, and error. The most compelling evidence comes from 3D modeling and auralization technology. Scientists can now create incredibly accurate digital twins of these theaters and simulate exactly how sound would have traveled from any point to any other point. They can virtually place a sound source on the stage, a voice speaking at a normal volume, another at a whisper, and with pinpoint accuracy map its journey to every single seat. These simulations remove all doubt. They show clear auditory pathways and sweet spots where whispers are not just audible but intelligible, patterns that align perfectly with areas likely occupied by priests or officials. This technology allows us to essentially travel back in time and experience the ancient soundscape as it was meant to be heard, providing irrefutable, empirical proof that the transmission of quiet, secretive speech was not a quirky side effect, but a fundamental feature of the design. This scientific validation is the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. It bridges the gap between the romantic tales of the past and the quantifiable facts of the present. The myths of accidental acoustics are Chinese letter debunked. We now know with certainty that ancient architects possessed a sophisticated knowledge of physics and applied it with intentionality to create spaces that served a dual purpose. They built monuments to human culture that were also precision instruments for auditory surveillance. The stones themselves have been telling us their secret all along. We simply didn't have the tools to listen properly until now. Archaeoacoustics has given us those tools, allowing us to decode the hidden agenda etched into the very geometry of these magnificent structures, confirming that every whisper was meant to be heard. While the stones and science tell a powerful story, the most direct evidence for the theater's secretive purpose comes from the voices of the ancients themselves, preserved in a rich literary and historical record that reads like a manual for ancient surveillance. The most authoritative technical source is the Roman architect and engineer Vitruvius, whose 10-volume treatise De Architectura was essentially the Bible for builders in the classical world. In Book 5, dedicated to public buildings, Vitruvius doesn't just mention acoustics in passing. He provides explicit, detailed instructions on how to achieve perfect sound propagation. He directs architects to select a site with a harmonious natural resonance and to employ mathematical ratios to determine the precise curvature of the seating. Most tellingly, he emphasizes the importance of placing bronze vessels called achaia in niches throughout the theater. For centuries, scholars debated whether these were decorative or perhaps resonators for music. But Vitruvius is clear. Their purpose was to vowelize the human voice, to catch the sound and create a unified, clear resonance that would support the actor's delivery. This wasn't about making a shout louder. It was about refining and clarifying the entire auditory spectrum, ensuring that even the most nuanced vocal inflection, a tremor of fear, a breathy whisper, would not be lost on its journey to the highest seats. His writing confirms that acoustic perfection was not an afterthought. It was a primary, non-negotiable design criterion from the very first sketch. This technical knowledge is brought to life in the plays that were performed in these spaces. Euripides' The Bacchae, a tragedy centered on secrecy, frenzy, and the dangers of hidden knowledge, is filled with acoustic references that would have landed with chilling effect in a theater designed to hear them. When the chorus warns that the gods have many shapes and many things they bring to pass beyond our hope, the line carries a double meaning, hinting at divine omniscience and the very real possibility of being overheard by unseen forces. The entire play is a drama about secrets spilling out and the catastrophic consequences that follow, a narrative that would have felt intensely immediate to an audience sitting in a structure that could capture their own private murmurs. The playwrights were acutely aware of their medium's power, not just to tell stories, but to be a conduit for information, both on and off the stage. Moving from the artistic to the historical, the record becomes even more explicit. The Roman orator and statesman Cicero, in his letters and speeches, provides a vivid window into the political intrigue of his day, and he frequently places the theater at the center of it. He recounts how the theater was a prime venue for gauging public opinion, noting that the cheers or jeers for a political figure entering the venue were a direct measure of their popularity. But more darkly, he alludes to it as a place where plots were uncovered. In one instance, he describes how whispers of a conspiracy were overheard by informants mingling in the crowd during a performance, their ears aided by the architecture's perfect acoustics. This wasn't a rare occurrence, it was a standard tool of statecraft. The historian Tacitus, chronicling the reign of the Emperor Nero, writes of the latter's professional informers who made a lucrative living by haunting public spaces like theaters and baths, listening for any scrap of seditious talk or criticism of the emperor that they could report in exchange for a portion of the condemned man's estate. The theater, with its unique combination of a relaxed public atmosphere and engineered auditory clarity, was their ideal hunting ground. Even the layout of the seating, as described by poets like Ovid, reinforces this function. The strict social hierarchy enforced by the seating arrangements, senators in the front, equestrians behind them, and so on, wasn't just about privilege. It created a known map for eavesdropping. A rival knew exactly where his target would be sitting and could position an informant accordingly. A whisper between two politicians in the orchestra could be caught by a client seated a few rows back, the sound traveling cleanly along the stone benches. By piecing together these fragments from architects, playwrights, orators, and historians, a clear and consistent picture emerges. This literary and historical paper trail moves the theory from an intriguing possibility to a compelling probability. It shows us that the people who designed, used, and wrote about these spaces were fully aware of their dual nature. They were monuments to culture and instruments of control, and their genius lies in how perfectly they served both masters without ever betraying the secret hidden in their flawless design. To fully appreciate the specialized genius of the ancient theater, we must step outside its semicircular embrace and examine it alongside the other monumental structures that define the classical cityscape. Each of these buildings served a distinct public purpose, and by comparing their designs, the theater's unique role as an auditory instrument comes into stunningly clear focus. Consider the mighty Roman amphitheater, a colossal oval like the Colosseum, engineered for one thing above all else: unobstructed visibility. Its design is all about the spectacle of the games, the roar of the crowd, the clash of gladiators, the drama of the hunt. The seating is steeply raked to ensure every single person had a clear view of the blood and sand below, but the acoustics are broad and general, meant to carry the roar of the masses, not the nuance of a whisper. The sound in an amphitheater is a wave of noise, a collective experience. In a theater, by contrast, the sound is a laser beam. The carefully calculated curvature and the filtering seats work together to isolate and carry individual voices, making it the perfect venue not for watching a spectacle, but for listening in on one. Even the grand civic forums and agoras, the bustling hearts of ancient political and commercial life, functioned on an entirely different principle. These were open plazas surrounded by colonnades, temples, and basilicas, spaces designed for the free, often chaotic, mixing of people. Conversation in a forum was public by its very nature. It was meant to be heard. Orators would speak from raised platforms, but their words competed with the din of merchants, the debates of philosophers, and the general hubbub of city life. There was no architectural assistance for sound here. If you wanted to be heard, you had to project your voice. This made the forum ideal for public declarations and open debate, but utterly useless for the discreet exchange of secrets. The theater, however, provided the perfect camouflage. Its very purpose was a public performance, which created a blanket of plausible deniability that a forum could never offer. A whispered conversation in the seats could always be explained away as a discussion about the play, a comment on an actor's performance, or a critique of the playwright's meter. It was the ideal hiding place, not in shadow, but in plain sight. This distinction becomes even more fascinating when we compare the theater to a building that did prioritize sound, the Roman Curia or Senate House. The Curia Julia in the Roman Forum was indeed designed with acoustics in mind. Its tall, box-like hall with high ceilings and hard, marble surfaces was intended to allow a senator's speech to ring out clearly to his colleagues. But this was acoustics for proclamation, not for eavesdropping. The sound was focused on the speaker, reinforcing a hierarchy of open debate among elites. Every word spoken in the Curia was meant for the official record. In a theater, the acoustic hierarchy was inverted. The design ensured that sound traveled from the audience and the stage to the entire space, placing everyone on an equal auditory plane. This created a democratic field of sound where a whisper from a low-ranking official could carry as clearly as one from a consul, making it a far more effective and unpredictable intelligence-gathering tool than the formally structured Senate. This comparative view reveals the theater's true brilliance. It wasn't just another public building, it was an architectural chameleon, a multi-tool in the ancient urban toolkit. The temple was for prayer, the forum for commerce, the amphitheater for visceral spectacle, and the Curia for political debate. But the theater, it was for listening. Its design allowed it to wear the acceptable mask of high culture while functioning as a sophisticated listening device. This unique combination of cultural prestige and acoustic precision made it the undisputed champion for covert activities. It was the one place where power could listen to itself and to the people without ever admitting that it was listening at all. For the ancient mind, sound was not merely a physical phenomenon. It was a living, mystical force that bridged the gap between the mortal world and the divine. They heard the universe not as a silent void, but as a chorus of meaning. The wind through the trees was the voice of a god. the crash of thunder a pronouncement of celestial anger, and the gentle whisper a vessel for ultimate truth. This profound belief infused every aspect of their lives, transforming the act of listening from a simple sensory function into a sacred, almost magical practice. In this worldview, a secret spoken in a hushed tone wasn't just private information. It was thought to be closer to the soul, less corrupted by the posturing of public speech, and therefore more likely to contain a fundamental truth. A confession, a prayer, or a prophecy gained its power precisely because it was whispered, as if the speaker were drawing directly from a well of hidden knowledge that could only be accessed through quiet intimacy. This cultural psychology is the essential key to understanding why the acoustic perfection of their theaters was so much more than a technical achievement. It was a spiritual and political necessity. This belief system directly shaped the function of the theater as a confessional and ritualistic space. In the healing sanctuary of Epidaurus, a patient's whispered description of their symptoms to a priest of Asclepius was not just a medical consultation, it was a sacred offering. The illness was often perceived as a physical manifestation of a spiritual impurity or a sin, a secret burden that needed to be released. The act of whispering this confession was a form of purification, and the theater's architecture ensured that this vulnerable, holy communication was transmitted with perfect clarity to the healer priest, who acted as an intermediary to the divine. The sound itself was considered part of the cure. The patient wasn't just listing ailments, they were releasing a truth into the acoustically sacred space where it could be received, cleansed, and answered. Similarly, in the initiation rites of mystery cults like the Eleusinian mysteries, the most profound secrets of the religion, the aporta, were whispered to new initiates. This whispered transmission was a core part of the ritual's power, creating an intense bond of secrecy and privilege. The theater's design guaranteed that these sacred whispers reached the intended ears alone, making the space itself a guardian of the divine mystery, an active participant in the ritual that separated the enlightened from the profane. This control over sacred sound had a direct and powerful corollary in the secular realm of power and authority. If a priest could hear the whispered confessions of the sick, then a ruler could hear the whispered conspiracies of his rivals. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. A leader who could demonstrate an almost supernatural ability to uncover plots and secrets didn't need to rely solely on force to maintain control. They could cultivate an aura of omniscience. The acoustic design of the theater became their greatest tool in this psychological campaign. By strategically placing informants in the crowd, or even just promoting the idea that no whisper was safe within the curved stone walls, a ruler could project power effortlessly. The population would begin to police itself, the constant, low-grade anxiety of being overheard acting as a more effective deterrent against rebellion than any number of guards. The architecture facilitated what we might now call a surveillance state, but one powered by belief and perception as much as by actual eavesdropping. The very stones seemed to be listening, and that perception was as effective as fact in maintaining social order and reinforcing the hierarchical structures that placed the ruling elite at the acoustic, and therefore informational, center of the universe. Ultimately, this deep-seated psychology of sound is what separates the ancient theater from any modern performance hall. We build for amplification, they built for revelation. We see acoustics as a matter of engineering clarity. They saw it as a way to harness a mystical force. Their architectural choices, the specific curves, the chosen materials, the precise geometry, were guided by a world view where the spiritual and the physical were inextricably linked. The theater was the ultimate expression of this philosophy, a machine built to capture truth, to transmit the divine, and to concentrate power through the most fragile and powerful of human expressions, the whisper. It was a space where the very air seemed charged with meaning, teaching us that to understand these structures, we must listen not just with our ears, but with an appreciation for an entire way of perceiving the world that heard the universe speaking in every rustle and sigh. This mastery of sound was not born from random chance or happy accident. It was the product of a deeply sophisticated understanding of physics and material science, a form of engineering so precise that it continues to baffle and inspire acousticians to this very day. The ancient builders were not merely stacking stones, they were orchestrating the very behavior of sound waves, using a combination of carefully selected materials and mathematically perfect geometry to create an environment where even the faintest whisper could find its target. At the heart of their design was a principle modern architects call passive amplification, achieving incredible auditory effects without a single moving part or electronic component, relying solely on the intelligent application of natural law. The choice of materials was the first critical decision, and it was made with a keen awareness of sonic properties. While we might look at the weathered limestone benches of Epidaurus and see simple, gray stone, the ancient engineers saw a perfect acoustic instrument. Limestone possesses a specific density and a subtly porous surface that makes it exceptionally good at reflecting the mid to high frequencies of the human voice, while simultaneously absorbing some of the less desirable low-frequency rumble. It's hard enough to bounce sound efficiently, but not so slick and hard that it would create a harsh, ringing echo. In grander Roman theaters, this principle was amplified with the use of polished marble. This luxurious material is even more sonically reflective, acting almost like an acoustic mirror. When a senator's voice projected across the orchestra, it wasn't just fading into the air, it was being caught and thrown back by these meticulously finished surfaces, ensuring its energy was preserved and directed. Even the composition of the audience became part of the material science. The clothing of the spectators, primarily wool and linen in Greece, heavier woolen togas in Rome, acted as a natural absorber for the very highest frequencies, subtly filtering out distracting hisses and leaving the clear, intelligible core of the human voice to dominate the soundscape. But materials alone are nothing without form. The true genius of these structures lies in their geometry, a sacred mathematics of space that transformed a collection of stone blocks into a giant acoustic lens. The most famous of these ratios is the golden section, approximately 1.618 to 1, a proportion repeatedly found in nature that the Greeks believed held the key to perfect harmony and beauty. There is compelling evidence that this ratio governed the relationship between the width of the orchestra, the height of the skene building, and the overall diameter of the cavea. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice. This specific proportion creates a natural resonance, a harmonious relationship between the dimensions that allows sound waves to reinforce each other rather than canceling out. The orchestra itself was almost always a perfect circle or a segment of a circle. This shape is acoustically crucial because sound waves emanating from a central point naturally radiate outward in a circular pattern. The curved wall of the orchestra and the seating acted as a continuous reflector, gently guiding those expanding waves upward and inward, focusing them toward the audience rather than letting them scatter uselessly into the open sky. Perhaps the most ingenious geometric feature was the design of the seating itself. Each row of benches was not merely a flat step, they were precisely angled both horizontally and vertically. The vertical rise between each row was calculated to ensure that the sound wave from the stage would glance off the hard surface of the seat in front of a spectator and travel upward to the next row, where the process would repeat. This created a cascading effect, a literal stairway of sound. Furthermore, the horizontal curvature of each row was not a smooth, continuous arc. Researchers have found that the seats were often arranged in a series of subtle, segmented facets. This break in the curve was a brilliant way to manage sound diffraction, the bending of waves around obstacles. These facets prevented sound from spinning out along a single, smooth curve and instead broke it up, redistributing the acoustic energy evenly across the entire auditorium and eliminating dead spots. This intricate combination of material selection and geometric precision reveals a level of intentionality that is simply breathtaking. It shows us that every stone, every angle, every proportion was a considered part of a grand acoustic equation, an equation solved over 2 millennia ago to build not just a stage for stories, but an instrument for listening to the secrets those stories concealed. Yet this profound mastery of sound, this intricate dance between architecture and acoustics that defined the classical world, did not seamlessly transition into the modern era. As we moved from the age of empires into the Industrial Revolution and beyond, the very philosophy behind theater design underwent a fundamental and quiet revolution of its own. The driving force was no longer the sacred or the secret, but the spectacular. The invention of electric lighting dismantled the tyranny of the sun, allowing performances to continue long into the night within enclosed spaces. This was a liberation, but it also presented a new set of challenges. A massive, enclosed opera house or a Broadway proscenium arch creates a cavernous volume of air that sound must travel through, fighting against absorption from plush seats, heavy curtains, and the audience itself. The elegant, passive acoustic solutions of the ancients were no longer sufficient to fill these vast, ornate new boxes. The answer, of course, came not from geometry, but from technology. The development of the microphone and the public address system in the late 19th and early 20th centuries represented a complete paradigm shift. Suddenly, the human voice no longer needed to be a well-trained instrument, capable of projecting to the furthest corner of a stone bowl. An actor could now murmur intimately into a lapel mic, and that murmur could be electronically amplified to a deafening roar, heard with perfect, artificial clarity by everyone in the room, regardless of the architecture's flaws. This was a democratization of sound in one sense, but it also represented a profound loss. It severed the sacred, physical connection between the performer's breath and the listener's ear. The voice was no longer a force of nature shaped by stone. It became an electronic signal, processed and pumped through speakers. The architecture itself was effectively neutered, its role reduced to that of a visually stunning container for high-tech audio equipment. The subtle, whispering gallery effect that allowed for clandestine communication was erased by the blanket of amplified sound, which drowns out all nuance not fed directly into the system. This technological shift reflects a deeper change in our cultural priorities. Modern theater design is overwhelmingly dominated by the visual. We prize sweeping balconies, dramatic lighting rigs, soaring ceilings, and immersive stagecraft. Acoustic considerations, while still important, often take a backseat, addressed reactively with sound-absorbing panels and complex speaker arrays, rather than being proactively baked into the very form of the building. Our goal is comfort, clarity, and visual spectacle, a controlled, predictable, and comfortable experience. The ancient goal was immersion of an entirely different kind, an immersive auditory environment where you were not just a spectator, but an active participant in a shared soundscape, where the space itself was a character in the performance, capable of revealing secrets. We traded the multifaceted, sometimes unpredictable genius of natural acoustics for the reliable, sterile clarity of the mixing board. This isn't merely a nostalgic observation, it's a recognition of a lost art form. The ancient theater was a multifunctional tool, a place of worship, a political tool, a social monitor, and a medical instrument, all unified by its acoustic design. The modern theater, for all its glory, is largely a venue for single-purpose entertainment. The contrast forces us to ask a compelling question. In our relentless pursuit of technological solutions, what innate human wisdom have we left behind? The answer might lie not in building new theaters, but in looking back. The principles of passive acoustic amplification, using shape and material to guide sound, are finding new life in cutting-edge fields. Architects designing secure facilities, confidential meeting rooms, or even urban landscapes are now studying these ancient designs to create spaces that can enhance desired sounds while suppressing others, all without a single wire. The same physics that carried a conspirator's whisper in Rome could be used to design a public square where a speaker can be heard without shouting, or a hospital waiting room that feels more peaceful by naturally dampening stressful noise. The decline of acoustic priorities in modern theaters isn't just a historical footnote. It's an invitation to rediscover a forgotten wisdom and listen, once again, to what the ancient stones have to teach us. Of all the enduring legacies of the ancient world, perhaps none is more shrouded in modern myth than the acoustic miracle of its theaters. We've all heard the stories, the near-magical tales of a pin drop echoing through a stone bowl to reach thousands. And in our awe, we've often comforted ourselves with a convenient assumption that this must have been a happy accident, a fortunate byproduct of building into a hillside, a lucky confluence of stone and shape that the architects themselves never fully understood. This romantic notion, however, is perhaps the greatest misconception of all. The evidence, as we've seen, points overwhelmingly to deliberate, sophisticated engineering. These were not chance occurrences, they were calculated achievements. To dismiss them as accidental is to rob the ancient builders of their genius, to deny them the credit for a mastery of physics that we are only now, with our digital tools and sound maps, beginning to fully appreciate. They knew exactly what they were doing. The whispering galleries were a feature, not a bug. This first myth often walks hand in hand with a second, more idealized one, that these theaters were purely instruments of democracy, noble forums where every citizen, from the wealthy elite to the humble farmer, had an equal voice and an equal ear. This vision of classical antiquity is compelling, but it's only half the story. While the theater was indeed a space for civic gathering and the performance of plays that could critique powerful figures, its flawless acoustics also made it a potent tool for those in power to maintain control. The same design that allowed a playwright's subversive line to be heard by all also allowed an informant to hear a seditious whisper. The architecture was ideologically neutral. It could amplify democratic discourse just as easily as it could facilitate authoritarian surveillance. It was a double-edged sword, a tool that could cut both for and against the people, depending entirely on who was holding the handle. This leads us to a third, more subtle misconception about the nature of sound within these spaces. We often imagine the process of eavesdropping as a deliberate, focused act, a spy intently leaning in to catch a specific, hushed conversation. And while that certainly happened, the true power of the theater's design lay in its ability to exploit the entire soundscape, including the ambient and the accidental. It wasn't just about listening for something, it was about listening to everything. The acoustics were so finely tuned that they captured a vast array of sonic information. The nervous cough of a man lying about his taxes, the hesitant pause before a soldier answered a question about his loyalty, the collective, relieved sigh of the crowd when a disliked official left his seat. These unintentional sounds, these auditory tells, were a goldmine of information. A ruler or a priest didn't need to hear a plotted conspiracy word for word to sense unrest. They could feel it in the rhythm of the crowd's murmur, a valuable form of social data mining that happened in real time, thanks to the stone amplifier they were all sitting inside. By moving past these myths, we arrive at a much richer, more complex, and ultimately more human understanding of these magnificent structures. They were not perfect temples of democracy, nor were they sinister panopticons. They were sophisticated tools reflecting the full spectrum of the society that built them, a blend of high idealism and hard-nosed pragmatism. The same culture that gave us philosophy, tragedy, and the concepts of citizenship also engaged in political intrigue, espionage, and social control. The theater did not choose a side. It embodied this beautiful, contradictory complexity. It was a space where art and power, the sacred and the secret, the public proclamation and the private whisper, existed in a constant, dynamic tension. To see them in this true light is to appreciate them not as relics of a lost, idealized past, but as profound and timeless monuments to human ingenuity in all its multifaceted glory. The genius of the ancient architects did not vanish with the fall of Rome. Instead, it was quietly preserved, its principles carried forward through the centuries by builders and masons who understood that the control of sound was a form of power. This knowledge found a new home in the soaring stone naves of medieval Gothic cathedrals. While their primary purpose was to inspire awe and elevate the soul toward the heavens, these vast sacred spaces also became accidental, yet brilliant, acoustic inheritors of the ancient world's secrets. The long, barrel-vaulted ceilings and hard, reflective stone surfaces created long reverberation times, perfect for the enveloping, ethereal swell of Gregorian chant, which would linger in the air like a divine presence. But in the shadows of these same cathedrals, whispering galleries emerged, curved walls, like those in the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where a secret murmured by one person could travel with impossible clarity to another far across the chamber. This was not merely a quirky architectural feature. For priests and penitents, it offered a channel for confidential confession, and for the political and economic elite of the medieval world, it provided a discreet way to communicate away from prying ears, proving that the sacred and the secret could once again coexist under one roof. This fascination with acoustically mediated communication reached a new zenith during the Renaissance, an era obsessed with intrigue, espionage, and the delicate art of diplomacy. The sprawling courts of power, from the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence to the royal palaces of France, were designed as much for whispered negotiation as for public spectacle. Architects incorporated sound moderating features into their very blueprints. They built intimate, paneled chambers with specially angled walls and ceilings to contain conversation, and they designed elaborate, ear sculptures or grotesque masks high on the walls, not just as decoration but as functional sound conduits, their open mouths sometimes connected to tubes that led to a hidden listener in a room above. These were the literal eavesdroppers, a term that itself originates from someone listening from under the eaves of a building. The goal was to create environments where the powerful could control the flow of information, hearing without being heard, mastering the auditory landscape just as the Roman emperors had in their grand theaters. The science of sound had become an essential tool of statecraft, a direct lineage from the stone benches of Epidaurus to the gilded salons of Versailles. This enduring legacy is vibrantly alive in our modern world, a testament to the timelessness of the ancient pursuit. Contemporary architects and acoustic engineers still look back to these classical principles when designing spaces where sound is paramount. The world's greatest concert halls, like the Wiener Musikverein or the Berliner Philharmonie, are painstakingly designed to achieve a perfect balance of resonance and clarity, using shaped balconies, diffusive surfaces, and calculated volumes to naturally amplify the rich textures of an orchestra without a hint of electronic assistance, a direct homage to the passive amplification method. Millennia ago, similarly, the chambers of modern democracies, from the United States Capitol to the debating rooms of the United Nations, are engineered for audibility and nuance. The arrangement of seats, the angles of the walls, and the materials used in construction are all chosen to ensure that every representative's voice can be heard clearly, fostering transparent debate while also, perhaps, allowing the subtle, telling inflections in an opponent's argument to be detected across the floor. Tracing this unbroken thread of influence reveals something profound about humanity itself. Our drive to shape our environment for perfect sound is not a mere technical obsession. It is a fundamental response to a deep-seated human need. We crave connection, clarity, and understanding in our public communications, whether it's the shared experience of a symphony or the collective deliberation of lawmaking. Simultaneously, we are compelled by the need for privacy, discretion, and the strategic advantage that comes from controlling information in our private interactions. The ancient theaters, in their breathtaking duality, were the first to architecturally reconcile these two opposing desires. They showed us that a space could be both grandly public and intimately private all at once. This is their true cultural legacy, a proof that the pursuit of perfect sound for both the open declaration and the hidden secret is a timeless human endeavor. It is an eternal dance between the message we broadcast to the world and the truth we whisper only to a chosen few, a dance that continues to shape the very walls we build around us. So what does this ancient mastery of sound mean for us today, living in a world of wireless earbuds and concert hall speaker arrays? It turns out, the principles etched into the stone of Epidaurus are experiencing a remarkable renaissance, offering surprisingly elegant solutions to some of our most modern dilemmas. We're no longer building grand theaters for Dionysian festivals, but we are designing spaces where the control of sound is more critical than ever, and the old ways are providing brilliant new inspiration. This isn't about historical recreation, it's about harnessing a forgotten wisdom for contemporary challenges, from protecting privacy in a noisy world to crafting urban environments that soothe rather than stress. Consider the modern courthouse, a place where the stakes of private conversation could not be higher. A hushed discussion between a lawyer and their client must remain absolutely confidential, yet it often happens in bustling hallways or open waiting areas. What if we could design these spaces with the acoustic intelligence of an ancient theater? Architects are now exploring the use of specially curved walls and sound-diffusing surfaces in justice buildings. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they function like modern whispering galleries, creating zones where conversations are contained and protected from unintended eavesdropping, not through electronic jamming but through pure physics. Similarly, museums are beginning to apply these principles to enhance the visitor experience. Imagine standing before a profound piece of art, and the design of the room itself gently muffles the distracting chatter from the next gallery, allowing you to have a private, reflective moment. This application of ancient acoustics moves beyond simple noise reduction to actively sculpt the soundscape, creating pockets of intimacy and focus in the midst of public chaos. The potential extends far beyond individual buildings and into the very fabric of our cities through the emerging field of acoustic urbanism. Urban planners and soundscape ecologists are looking at the ancient understanding of how sound interacts with hard surfaces and open spaces. The goal is to move beyond just fighting noise pollution and instead proactively design for auditory well-being. By employing the same principles of diffusion and reflection that the Greeks used, We can design public squares that naturally dampen the harsh roar of traffic while amplifying the pleasant sounds of human interaction, the laughter of children in a playground, the melody of a street musician, the gentle rustle of leaves in a park. This isn't a vague ideal, it's a practical design strategy. For instance, the strategic placement of buildings and the use of specifically textured materials on their facades can break up and absorb the low-frequency rumble of highways, while curved amphitheater-like seating in a park can naturally carry the sounds of a community event without the need for loudspeakers. Perhaps the most forward-thinking application lies in the world of material science. Researchers are developing new, ultra-efficient acoustic panels and plasters inspired by the porous, sound-filtering properties of limestone. These bio-inspired materials aim to replicate the ancient stone's ability to absorb undesirable low-frequency noise while reflecting clearer, higher-frequency speech. This technology could revolutionize interior design in offices, schools, and hospitals, creating environments that are not just quieter, but auditorily clearer, reducing stress and improving communication without a single electronic device. The lesson from the ancients is profound. Utility and beauty are not mutually exclusive. A wall can be both a stunning architectural feature and a sophisticated acoustic instrument. A public space can be open and inviting while also offering zones of acoustic privacy. By looking backward to these masters of stone and sound, we are finding innovative ways to move forward, building a future where our environments don't just house us, but actively listen to our needs and respond in kind, creating a world that is finally learning to hear itself again. Think about the most powerful person you know. Now imagine if they could truly hear everything, every muttered complaint, every private joke made at their expense, every secret plan whispered behind closed doors. In the ancient world, the theater was the ultimate expression of that terrifying, all-hearing power. It wasn't just a building for plays, it was a permanent, unblinking declaration of control, carved in stone for everyone to see and, most importantly, to hear. When a ruler commissioned one of these grand structures, they were doing far more than providing entertainment for the masses. They were architecturally announcing their omnipresence, creating a physical space where their influence was felt in the very air itself, a constant, subtle reminder that no whisper was ever truly safe. This projection of power worked on multiple, devastatingly effective levels. Most obviously, there was the sheer, jaw-dropping scale of the construction itself. A massive stone theater capable of holding thousands of citizens was a staggering display of wealth and logistical might. It showed that the state, or the emperor himself, commanded the resources, the labor force, and the engineering knowledge to reshape the very landscape to their will. It was a public works project that served as a permanent advertisement for imperial benevolence. Look what I provide for you, while simultaneously functioning as a monument to the absolute authority that made it possible. The message was clear: the same power that can build this wonder for your enjoyment can also deploy that power in other, less pleasant ways. The grandeur was a velvet glove, but the iron fist was never far from view. The true genius, however, lay in the invisible layer of control woven into the design. Unlike a fortress or a palace wall, which projects power through sheer, intimidating physicality, the theater's power was psychological and far more insidious. By designing a space where sound carried with such impossible clarity, the architects were creating a panopticon of the ear. The ruler didn't need to be present in the theater for his influence to be felt. The architecture itself did the work. Every citizen sitting in those seats, aware that even a hushed conversation could be overheard rows away, would inevitably begin to self-censor. They would subconsciously police their own speech and the speech of those around them. This internalized control is the most potent form of power there is because it doesn't require enforcement. It becomes a habit, a part of the social fabric. The theater, therefore, was a machine for manufacturing consent and compliance through acoustic intimidation, all while hosting a comedy. This symbolism transformed the ruler's role in the public consciousness. By controlling the means of overhearing secrets, a leader could cultivate an aura of divine-like omniscience. They could appear to have their finger on the pulse of the city, anticipating discontent before it boiled over, uncovering plots before they were hatched, and seemingly knowing the personal lives of their subjects. In an age where information moved at the speed of a horse or a running man, this was a monumental advantage, a well-timed revelation, a strategic arrest based on overheard intelligence, or a public address that seemed to directly answer the people's private fears. These actions reinforced the idea that the ruler was all-knowing, all-hearing, and by extension, all-powerful. The theater was the engine of this perception, the physical proof that the state's ears were everywhere. It was architecture as propaganda, and its message resonated long after the final applause died away. Yet this remarkable power to hear secrets, so brilliantly engineered into the very stones of the ancient world, came at a profound cost, one that the philosophers and thinkers of the time were acutely aware of. Imagine the great Socrates himself strolling through the Athenian agora, engaging his fellow citizens in dialogue. He was a fierce critic of the sophists, who taught the art of persuasive speech, and he championed a philosophy built on genuine inquiry and self-knowledge. For such a man, the very idea of a state-sanctioned architecture of eavesdropping would have been deeply troubling. He famously warned that a society built on suspicion and surveillance was one that eroded the very foundation of human community, trust. If citizens could not speak freely among themselves without fear of being overheard and reported, how could true friendship or honest political discourse possibly flourish? This wasn't just a theoretical concern. It struck at the heart of what it meant to live a good and virtuous life in a community. The theater, for all its cultural splendor, created an environment where paranoia could thrive, forcing people to wear a mask even in casual conversation, forever wondering who might be listening from a few rows away. This ancient tension between collective security and individual liberty is not some relic of a distant past. It is the very same ethical tightrope we walk today. The sophisticated stone algorithms of the ancient theater have their direct descendants in our digital world, the data mining algorithms of social media platforms, the facial recognition software in our city centers, and the vast digital surveillance networks operated by governments worldwide. The core question remains unchanged. How much of our inherent right to privacy are we willing to sacrifice for the promise of greater safety and social order? The citizens of Rome might have accepted that their whispers in the theater of Pompey could be overheard by the emperor's informants, perhaps reasoning that it was a small price to pay for the stability of the empire and the entertainment provided. Today, we make similar calculations, often without fully realizing it, when we click agree on lengthy terms of service documents, allowing corporations to harvest our personal data in exchange for the convenience of a free service. The critical lesson history offers us is that these systems, whether built from stone or code, are never neutral. They reflect the values and intentions of those who design and control them. In the hands of a benevolent ruler, the acoustic surveillance of a theater might be used to uncover genuine plots of violence and protect the populace. In the hands of a tyrant, that same technology becomes a tool for oppression, used to silence dissent and crush any whisper of opposition. This is precisely why the ethical dimension is so vital. It forces us to look beyond the sheer cleverness of the technology, whether it's the geometric perfection of the cavia or the sleek interface of a new app, and ask the more fundamental questions. Who controls this tool? What are their motives? Who is being watched and who is doing the watching? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of society does this technology ultimately help to build? One of open trust and mutual respect, or one of suspicion and silent conformity? Engaging with this ancient ethical dilemma doesn't provide us with easy answers for our modern world, but it does provide us with crucial perspective. It reminds us that we are not the first generation to grapple with the double-edged sword of surveillance technology. The debates we are having about digital privacy, state security, and corporate data collection are the latest chapters in a conversation that is thousands of years old. By looking back at the choices made by ancient societies, the trade-offs they accepted, and the warnings issued by their philosophers, we can better navigate our own complex landscape. We can strive to implement technologies that protect us without imprisoning us, that create security without sacrificing the freedom and trust that are the bedrock of any healthy society. The stones of Epidaurus urge us to listen not just to secrets but to the wisdom of the past. But to view these grand structures solely through the lens of the powerful is to miss a crucial and far more human layer of the story. For every senator in the front row and every spy listening from the shadows, there were countless others who experienced the theater from its social and physical periphery. Women, enslaved people, foreigners, and the poor were often relegated to the highest, farthest tiers of the cavia, separated from the elite by both law and custom. From our modern perspective, we might see this as a simple story of exclusion, of these groups being pushed to the edges and silenced. But the remarkable acoustics of these spaces twist that narrative into something far more complex and fascinating. The very architecture that empowered the powerful to eavesdrop also, perhaps unintentionally, created unique acoustic pockets that allowed the marginalized to speak and be heard by each other in ways that subverted the social order. Imagine the experience of a group of women sitting together in the designated women's section high up in the Roman theater. The social codes of the time severely restricted their public speech and movement. Yet here they were in a vast public space, surrounded by the protective cover of a crowd and the immersive soundscape of a performance. The play unfolding on the stage below provided the perfect auditory camouflage. Under its cover, they could engage in conversations that would be impossible in the quieter, more scrutinized spaces of the forum or a private home. But they often went a step further, developing sophisticated systems of coded communication. Historical accounts and comedic plays themselves hint at this practice. A line from a popular comedy might contain a double meaning, a perfectly innocent phrase to the male playwright and the majority of the audience, but a specific, pre-arranged signal to the women in the upper tiers. A mention of a certain color, a goddess, or a household item could convey a message about a meeting place, a piece of gossip about a powerful man, or a warning about his behavior. The play wasn't just entertainment, it was their encrypted messaging system, and the theater's design ensured those messages were delivered with clarity to their intended recipients, high above the seats of power. This phenomenon extended to other disenfranchised groups as well. Enslaved individuals accompanying their wealthy patrons to the theater, often standing in the aisles or at the very back, found themselves in a rare position. They were invisible to the elites focused on the stage, yet connected to each other through the same acoustic web. A low, hurried whisper between two slaves from different households could carry news, share warnings about a particularly cruel master, or even coordinate small acts of resistance, all under the resonant blanket of a tragic monologue. For foreigners and merchants from distant lands, the theater was a hub for information exchange. Sitting in their own sections, they could discuss commodity prices, political instability in their home regions, or the challenges of navigating a new culture, their conversations masked by the laughter of the crowd at a comedian's joke. In these peripheral zones, the theater transformed. It became less a panopticon of control and more a network, a subterranean web of communication operating in plain sight, using the state's own magnificent architecture against itself. This creates a powerful and essential counter-narrative to the story of top-down acoustic control. The same physics that allowed a ruler to project an aura of omniscience also enabled the very people he sought to control to carve out their own spheres of agency and community. It reminds us that technology, even ancient architectural technology, is never monolithic in its effects. It can be appropriated, adapted, and turned to purposes its original designers never envisioned. The sound that empowered the powerful also, paradoxically, empowered the powerless. It gave a voice to those who were officially voiceless, allowing them to build solidarity, share knowledge, and preserve a sense of identity and community within a rigidly hierarchical society. The Grand Theatre, therefore, was not just a stage for the drama of kings and heroes. It was also a silent witness to countless smaller, quieter dramas of resistance, connection, and survival, proving that even the most controlled environments can have acoustic cracks where freedom finds a way to whisper. Even with all we've uncovered, the true depth of ancient acoustic engineering is still coming into focus, and every answer seems to unlock a dozen new questions waiting for their turn in the spotlight. We've marveled at the perfection of Epidaurus, but how did these principles of sound manipulation translate across the vast expanse of the ancient world? Did the architects of a small theater in the highlands of Anatolia work from the same acoustic playbook as those building on the coast of North Africa? Regional variations in material availability, cultural priorities, and even the very language spoken would have inevitably shaped these designs. A theater built for the poetic cadences of Greek would have different acoustic needs than one designed for the more percussive rhythms of Latin or the complex tones of other ancient languages. Uncovering these nuances is like trying to reconstruct a global symphony from a few recovered notes. We have the general melody, but the full, rich harmony is still just beyond our hearing. This line of inquiry leads to one of the most tantalizing and unresolved mysteries. Were their structures built with a singular, covert purpose? Did the ancient world possess buildings designed not for public performance at all, but exclusively for the art of eavesdropping? The very idea seems to leap from the pages of a spy novel, yet it is a question that serious archaeologists are now beginning to ask. Imagine a building that looked like a standard Odeon or a small council chamber, but whose entire architectural raison d'etre was to capture and isolate sound for state intelligence. Such a place wouldn't need a large stage or seating for thousands. Its genius would be hidden in far more subtle acoustic traps and whispering conduits, a black site for auditory interrogation built long before the concept even had a name. The tools to chase these mysteries are more powerful than ever, blending the painstaking work of the trowel with the limitless potential of the digital realm. Ongoing archaeological excavations continue to yield surprises. Recent work at sites like the ancient city of Stratonikeia in Turkey has unearthed structures with highly unusual acoustic properties, rooms with bizarrely angled walls and niches that seem to have no other purpose than to bizarrely distort or channel sound in very specific ways. Each carefully brushed away layer of soil has the potential to reveal a new piece of the puzzle. Simultaneously, in laboratories and universities around the world, researchers are creating incredibly detailed 3D models of these ancient sites. Using a process called auralization, they can simulate exactly how sound would have behaved within these spaces, testing theories about frequency transmission and pinpointing the exact acoustic sweet spots that would have been most valuable to a hidden listener. This marriage of dirt and data is revolutionizing the field, allowing us to conduct experiments that would have been impossible just a decade ago. This is the exhilarating part of the journey, realizing that history is not a closed book but a living, breathing field of study that constantly evolves. Each new technological advance, from ground-penetrating radar that can map subterranean chambers to AI algorithms that can analyze thousands of architectural plans for common acoustic features, gives us a fresh lens through which to examine the past. The story of the ancient theater is still being written, and we are all invited to be a part of it. The next great discovery might be waiting in the unpublished notes of a 19th-century archaeologist, in the laser scan of a forgotten ruin, or in the soil of a yet unexcavated site. Who knows what secrets these silent stone witnesses are still holding, patiently waiting for us to develop the right tools and to ask the right questions to finally hear their story. Now let's make this personal for a moment. Close your eyes if you'd like and try to truly picture yourself there. You're not just a spectator to history anymore, you're a participant. Imagine the warm Greek sun on your shoulders, the scent of dust and dried herbs lingering in the air. You find a seat on the cool, smooth limestone, high up in the very last row of the theater of Epidaurus. The stage below looks almost miniature from this distance, a small circle surrounded by a sea of empty seats. Down there, a friend of yours walks to the very center, turns to face you, and without any strain or shouting, they simply whisper. It's not a projected stage whisper, it's a genuine, hushed secret, the kind you'd share with someone sitting right next to you. And yet, with impossible clarity, every syllable, every soft consonant, travels that vast distance directly to your ear, as if they were speaking right beside you. It's an experience that transcends reading about it. It feels like witnessing a gentle miracle, a secret shared across time and space. This isn't just a neat party trick from the past. It's a direct, tangible link to the minds of the people who lived over 2,000 years ago. That moment of acoustic wonder you just imagined is the very same sensation that a Greek citizen would have felt, the same awe that would have convinced them of the divine inspiration behind the design. It transforms the ancient world from a collection of dusty ruins in history books into a living, breathing reality. You're not just learning about their technology. For a brief moment, you're experiencing a piece of their world exactly as they intended it to be experienced. This connection bridges the millennia, making their genius feel immediate and profoundly human. And the most incredible part, you can test a tiny piece of this ancient magic for yourself right now with no special equipment needed. The next time you're in a building with a domed ceiling or a curved wall, perhaps in a grand cathedral, a capitol rotunda, or even a subway station with a curved tunnel, find a spot and try a simple experiment. Have a friend stand on the opposite side of the space and whisper facing the wall. You might be startled to find that their whisper travels along that curve and arrives at your ear with a spooky clarity, while someone standing directly between you hears nothing but muffled sounds. You've just created your own miniature whispering gallery, a direct, hands-on demonstration of the same acoustic principles the ancient Greeks mastered on a monumental scale. This simple act of personal experimentation does more than just prove a scientific point. It fundamentally changes your relationship with history. It shifts these grand structures from being distant, static monuments into brilliant, interactive puzzles. You start to look at the architecture around you differently, noticing curves and angles, wondering about the intent behind the design. You begin to appreciate that this wasn't magic, but a deep and applied understanding of the physical world. That whisper in a modern hallway becomes your own key to unlocking the secret of the ancients, a personal discovery that makes you an active archaeologist of sound, rediscovering a truth that has been waiting in plain sight and plain hearing for centuries. From the hushed confessions shared in the sacred space of Epidaurus to the dangerous political intrigues whispered within the grand theatres of Rome, we have journeyed together through one of history's most captivating architectural secrets. These magnificent structures were not merely stages for drama and spectacle. They were masterpieces of acoustic engineering, deliberately designed to capture the faintest murmur, the most carefully guarded secret. We have traced their origins from religious rituals to their evolution as sophisticated instruments of power. We have seen how modern science validates the intentional genius behind their design, confirming that every curve and every material was chosen to serve a dual purpose. Their legacy stretches far beyond entertainment, revealing how they functioned as essential tools for spirituality, for social control, and for the relentless pursuit of knowledge through eavesdropping. These ancient ruins stand as powerful reminders that history is rarely a simple story. It is a complex tapestry woven with visible threads and hidden layers, many of which are waiting not to be seen but to be heard. The true purpose of these theaters was concealed in plain sight for centuries, hidden behind the mask of culture and art, waiting for us to listen more closely to what the stones themselves were telling us. It challenges us to look at the world around us with a more curious and critical eye, to question the accepted narratives, and to listen for the whispers of history that often get drowned out by the shouts of the obvious. As you move on from this video, I encourage you to carry this idea with you. Start to notice the role sound plays in your own world. Consider how the design of the spaces you inhabit, from echoey auditoriums to sound-absorbing restaurants, shapes your conversations and your connections. Think about the modern equivalents of these ancient acoustic marvels, the digital algorithms that listen and learn from our every click and spoken word. How does the architecture of our online spaces, with their curated feeds and whispered suggestions, influence what we hear and what remains hidden? The conversation about how we use sound to connect, to control, and to understand one another is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What was the most surprising revelation for you? Have you ever experienced a modern whispering gallery or noticed intentional acoustic design in your own city? Share your experiences and reflections in the comments below. Let's keep this discussion going. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's hidden frequencies, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the past's greatest mysteries. After all, history doesn't always announce itself with a shout. Sometimes the most profound truths are passed down in whispers.